Hello, everyone. My name's Andrew. I'm a physicist at IBM Quantum, and I'll be discussing three topics here, falling within the larger category of using classical distributions of quantum circuits to enable larger simulations. So starting with this discussion of classically forged entanglement, a bit of motivation. There's been a lot of great progress simulating increasingly complicated systems on quantum hardware, though to date we haven't really seen a quantum advantage compared to the mature classical technology for example, solving quantum chemistry problems or similar applications. So that motivates a question of, in the near term, how can we best leverage our relative wealth of classical computing resources to extend the capabilities of our limited quantum hardware? So the idea here is to decompose a large circuit into a distribution of smaller circuits needing fewer qubits and fewer gates that we can run successfully on our devices, and then take those results and use classical processing to reconstruct the result of the large circuit. This idea of trading off quantum and classical resources has been in the literature for some time, including methods to cut a wire or cut a gate to produce a distribution of circuits that then are multiplied together and summed over. In the current work, I'll be discussing a general decomposition of a 2n qubit problem onto an n qubit computer, where this process can be done efficiently, provided the two halves are sufficiently weakly entangled. This slide has a quick crash course in the method. I'll refer you to the paper for more details, or you can ask me after. But in the upper left, we have some wave function we'd like to prepare in our system, or that we'd like to simulate, labeled psi. It has two halves labeled with up and down arrows, suggestive of the spin up and spin down parts of an electronic wave function. We can, in general, prepare such a state using the 2n qubit circuit shown, where we start off the two halves of the system, here 2 quantum registers, and some reference state, then apply a unitary E to generate entanglement between the two, and then further local operations U and V to locally structure the wave function. If we use a singular value decomposition, we can expand the first part of that circuit, the entanglement structure, as a Schmidt decomposition. So shown in the dashed pink box, we have a sum over a series of basis states, B1, B2, and so on, weighted by these lambda 1, lambda 2, et cetera, coefficients, which I'll refer to as the Schmidt coefficients. And these define the structure of the entanglement. Then if we'd like to compute an expectation value of this state, say we want observable O, we'll have a copy of psi on the left of O, a copy of psi on the right of O. Psi is, with the Schmidt decomposition in mind, we multiply through a whole bunch of terms when computing this, do a bit of extra Pauli algebra, and we can write the full expectation value as the summation over all of the terms arranged in this 2D grid in the lower center of the plot of the slide. These terms involve circuits, so grouped items are multiplied together, where the elements along the diagonal contain circuits where we first initialize a register in one of the bit string states, B1, B2, apply our local operations U or V, and then measure the part of the observable acting on that part of the system. Supposing O can be written as O1 tensor O2. The off-diagonal elements are similar, but instead of preparing these basis states, we're preparing superpositions of pairs of these states, so B1 plus B2 or B1 minus B2. And significantly, all of these terms only involve single register circuits. So we've taken our original, even though our original state involves 2 quantum registers, we're now able to do this computation with just half the number of qubits. So for our experimental demo of this idea, we're looking at a VQE simulation, a variational quantum eigensolver simulation of the ground state of the water molecule. So our model of this system consists of an active space of 10 spin orbitals, 5 up and 5 down. The standard way to do this is to map this, say with Jordan-Wigner mapping, onto a 10 qubit problem, perform the measurements needed to get to estimate the Hamiltonian and expectation value and get out the energies, say as a function of molecular geometry. So entanglement forging here is giving us an alternative path where we do this decomposition first, have a series of 5 qubit circuits to evaluate, do additional classical processing on those results, and ideally obtain the same answer this way. So it gives us a trade-off where we can have easier quantum circuits, though at the cost of having more of them to run. Little detail on the ansatz used in our VQE experiment. In the lower left, we have our 5 molecular orbitals for water. We're mapping those onto a line of 5 qubits. We're preparing these bit string states or superpositions of these bit string states. The purple box with the gates inside shows an example of preparing such a superposition of bit strings. We act on those with our parameterized gates. We called these particular gates hop gates. They have some nice properties for chemical simulations. And then that's the parameterized, optimized part of the circuit. And then we measure the necessary Pauli operators to reconstruct the energy. So again, the high-level view, the quantum processor is simulating the 2 halves of the system, feeding those results from that series of circuits to the classical processor, which is multiplying them together and doing this summation, where it's additionally weighting them by these lambda parameters, the Schmidt coefficients. So these Schmidt coefficients live entirely on the classical side of the computation, and they are thus a classical representation of the quantum entanglement structure in our state that we're simulating. Now, this also poses a challenge. We're classically representing quantum correlations. That's generally going to have, in the worst case, an exponential cost of some kind. So here that shows up as an exponential sampling cost. So an approach or workaround here is that we'll say, okay, we just restrict to the case where we're simulating a system with weakly entangled halves. Why does that avoid this problem? Well, weak entanglement between the 2 halves means that our Schmidt decomposition is going to drop off quickly. So it'll be dominated by the leading terms. We don't have to waste a lot of time sampling precisely those circuits associated with the smaller terms out in the tails of our distribution. So provided that we, say, sample circuits according to the values of the coefficients, lambda m, lambda n, associated with that particular circuit, it brings the sampling cost to something like a power of the 1 norm of this series of Schmidt coefficients, which is related to the entanglement strength. So weaker entanglement, fewer samples needed. And this is not a complete concession in that, or maybe less of a concession than it seems, in that a number of chemical systems, ground states especially, are expected to naturally have weak entanglement between the spin up and spin down components of the wave function. So here are the results of our experimental demo. On the left, we're looking at the energies from our converged VQE results as a function of the molecular geometry. So the x-axis is showing the distance between the oxygen and the hydrogen atoms as we symmetrically pull those hydrogens away from the oxygen, stretching the molecule. We see the experimental results are shown as blue circles. This was run on the IBM Q Dublin processor, a Falcon processor. We also are near equilibrium. If we zoom in on that region near the minimum of that potential curve, we see the error in the lower plot is typically on the order of 1 to 10 millihartries. So we're obtaining good accuracy in that regime. As we stretch the molecule, we see the accuracy degrade, increasing from order 10 to order 100 millihartry on that, again, on that lower left plot. We can understand that degradation in terms of entanglement forging by looking at the Schmidt coefficients in our converged wave function. So that's plotted over on the right. We see that around 1 angstrom, so near equilibrium geometry on the plot at the right, one of the Schmidt coefficients dominates the wave function. The other 2 are quite small. That's indicative of weak entanglement, where entanglement forging is going to work efficiently and work well. As we stretch the molecule, all 3 of those coefficients are becoming comparable to one another, stronger entanglement. In this experiment, we are actually truncating the Schmidt decomposition to include 3 bit strings. And with only 3 bit strings, we don't have enough expressivity in our ansatz to capture that stronger entanglement and its effect on the energy. So that's leading to an increase in the error in the lower left. We can probe that a little bit more by going back and running noiseless classical simulations of the experiment, now expanding the ansatz to include 6-bit strings instead of 3. And those results are shown as the empty pink squares in the lower left plot. And we see that a lot of that error has been reduced as we have a more expressive description of the entanglement. Just to quickly advertise a couple more, that's all I'll say about the water experiment. Advertise a couple more recent experiments using entanglement forging. On the left, we have a collaboration between IBM and Boeing, motivated by interest in understanding corrosion properties of aerospace materials. So there they used entanglement forging as part of a broader and more general quantum classical workflow for studying surface reactions, which they demonstrated looking at a magnesium surface interacting with a water molecule in that corrosion process. On the right, another collaboration, this time between IBM and JSR Corporation, motivated by understanding processes in photolithography. So here they used entanglement forging as part of a simulation to look at the photodissociation of a sulfonium cation. So an ultraviolet photon comes in and breaks apart that system. And using entanglement forging, they had 6 qubits and 12 spin orbitals and obtained energies, shown on the left, and also spectral information about this process. So more information is available at those archive IDs. So now I'll change gears a little bit and talk about some of the work that's been done to try to move entanglement forging and also related techniques from being a research topic into being really a research tool that people can more easily take and use for their own applications. And a lot of this work was done by the middleware for quantum team, especially Ismail Faro and Jennifer Glick. So just to advertise, they've made these packages available, Quantum Serverless and the Circuit Knitting Toolbox. These are now publicly available on GitHub. There's a QR code here. I'll flash that up also on the summary slide if you're interested, for allowing these, for facilitating sending these quantum classical jobs to the cloud. And as a quick high-level overview, for entanglement forging workloads, you start with some n-qubit electronic structure problem, decompose that classically, send that to potentially multiple backends running on half the number of qubits with each circuit, evaluate it using Qiskit runtime primitives, and then classically reconstruct that series of results to obtain the ground state energy. And additionally, these packages are compatible with deploying the classical processing to the cloud, so paving the way to really scale up these processes. A related technique is circuit cutting, also available through these packages, taking a quantum circuit, similarly deconstructing it into a series of subcircuits, running these on separate backends potentially, evaluating them, and we see in this demonstration that the reconstructed result of the reconstructed distribution of measured bit strings closely resembles the exact value that you'd expect for the original large quantum circuit. And this toolboxes also bring in the flexibility so that you can even deploy these as multi-cloud workloads, where in this case the decomposition could be done on Azure and the reconstruction done on AWS. All right, finally, a slightly different direction again. Now thinking about classical distributions of quantum circuits still, but using them instead for running error mitigation on larger problems. So on our circuits, most of the errors occur in our multi-qubit entangling gates, so our CNOT layers. In this recent paper by Vandenberg at that archive ID there, they demonstrated the use of an efficient learning scheme where they can learn a noise model for a layer of CNOTs across a full 27-qubit device in that case. And once they had that noise model, they're able to invert it and cancel the errors that occur in their circuit on average in a process known as probabilistic error cancellation. And that allows them to obtain accurate observables even after a number of CNOT layers. So more recently, we've taken this same learning scheme and run it on an Eagle processor. So this is a 127-qubit device now. And some of the example noise models that are learned through this process are shown at the right. Each of the little tiles or circles is indicating a local Pauli error rate. And those are, so now that we have this information for each of the layers that we'd like to run in our circuit, we're going to do something a little bit different and not invert that and cancel the noise, but instead just sample from that distribution directly, or perhaps by some scale factor, in order to controllably amplify the noise. So why do you want to controllably amplify the noise? Well, this is useful technique for doing what's this popular mitigation strategy known as zero noise extrapolation. So if you can run the original circuit and run a noise amplified version of the circuit at a known gain, noise gain factor, you can use that information to extrapolate back to an estimate of the noiseless or ideal expectation value. So that's what we're doing here. To test this on the Eagle device, we're looking at the Trotter circuit at right. So we have interleaved layers of single qubit RX gates and layers of multi-qubit ZZ gates. So each layer consists of a series of 2 qubit ZZ rotations fixed at angle pi over 2 so that we can implement the layer with a layer of depth 1 CNOTs on our hardware. We can think of this as a Trotter simulation of a 2D icing model where we have mapped 127 spins to each of the 127 qubit sites on our chip. And in the Hamiltonian that we're simulating, the RX gates are then, the angle of the RX gates is then representing the strength of a globally applied transverse field, while the ZZs are implementing nearest neighbor interactions between the spins. So here are some results running on the IBM Kiev Eagle processor. So at right, we're looking at the averaged weight 1 observable. So we measure sigma x on each of the individual 127 qubits and average those results and plot it here. This is as a function of the CNOT depth. So we're looking at 12, 24, or 36 layers of CNOTs across all of the device. The largest circuit here has something like 1,700 CNOTs, and we're still able to see signal after all of those CNOTs and these expectation values. We do see that it's decayed as you'd expect as errors are accumulated in these bigger and bigger circuits. But significantly, when we apply our error mitigation technique using zero noise extrapolation, we obtain the results shown in blue. For this particular example, I should mention this is a Clifford circuit, so we have not turned on our global field. So we know in advance that the true answer should be +1 for every one of the qubits for these particular circuit depths. And we see that we're able to eliminate, the error mitigation eliminates most of the error, obtaining fairly accurate ensemble means and ensemble standard deviations as shown by the blue circles and error bars, respectively. So we're very excited to be able to start probing error mitigation at this scale. But that, as I mentioned, was a Clifford circuit. Another interesting regime is non-Clifford circuits. This is an experiment, analogous experiment run on IBM Ithaca. So this is a 65-qubit processor. We're running the same kind of Trotter simulation, but now we're going to turn on that global field. So we're no longer just looking at Clifford circuits. So that field strength, and approximated by the Rx angle, the angle of our Rx gates is on the x-axis. At values of 0 and pi over 2, we recover Clifford circuits. So we can compare and see that our mitigated results agree pretty well with the ideal values indicated by stars. For intermediate Rx angles, we're really entering a new regime where we're going beyond what's exactly diagonalizable, and we're still seeing effects of error mitigation. They seem to be qualitatively correct, but we can't really compare it to an exact classical computation, though we can, of course, still compare to approximate classical methods. So this is a very exciting direction that we're excited about. All right, there's a summary of my talk. There's that QR code again if you'd like to check out the Quantum Classical Cloud Services. And thanks for your attention and the opportunity to speak here.
Yes, I'm sorry. The very first example, you showed that you can present a large distribution prepared by a large circuit, splitting it in simpler circuits with less qubits, right?
Yes.
Just imagine you prepare a particular distribution, you split it to sample 1 time from the distribution? Do I sample from all the parts? For example, how many circuits should I sample is the question.
Yeah, so there's a sampling cost in the precision. So you had some number of shots you needed to run on the original circuit to obtain a target precision for your estimate of the observable. If the distribution is very flat, then we're looking at strong entanglement, and it's going to be exponentially expensive in the strength of that entanglement. Yeah. So so you have to, I mean, there is some domain of applicability here where the entanglement has to be weak enough for you to afford the runtime cost. And this, whether you can, to what degree you can know that in advance, you have to be a bit optimistic that you're going to look at a system with sufficiently weak entanglement, but it at least gives you a hopefully useful heuristic method in those cases where you can at least run something on your system, and maybe that gives you some useful information. Mm-hmm.